with a reasonable agreement, keep the government going, and move forward to do the things the American people have asked us to do. I yield the floor. I note, Mr. President.
Senator from New York.
I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, thank you. I'd ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I came to the floor the other night to talk about what I had learned in 2 years of town hall meetings in Colorado regarding our deficit, regarding our debt. And what I said the other night was that people in our state, whether in red parts of the state or blue parts of the state, have a common sense way of approaching this, and they've got a three-part test that they want to apply. First test is they want to make sure that we actually come up with something that materially addresses the problem we face. They're tired of gimmicks. They're tired of tricks. They really want us to sort this out. They know it's not going to be fixed overnight, but they want us to get started on it. The second test is that we're all in it together. They're tired of the us against them conversation that happens in Washington. They're tired of hearing that one person's ox is going to be gored or one group of people's ox is going to be gored and everyone else is going to be left alone. Everybody wants to contribute to solving this problem. The third test is that they want it to be bipartisan because, frankly, they don't have confidence in either party on this issue and they want to see us working together. That's it. And we should be working toward that as a Senate and as a House. We should be having a serious conversation about how not to leave our children stuck with a bill of $15 trillion of debt and a $1.5 trillion deficit. I feel that keenly as the father of 3 little girls myself. But I think it is very important for the American people to understand the debate we're having right now. The threat that we're going to shut the government down has nothing to do with the broader conversation about our deficit and our debt. In fact, shutting the government down is just going to make matters worse. I said the other night that there is not a superintendent of schools, I used to be one, in Colorado. There's not a city council or a mayor in Colorado from the largest city to the smallest town who would dream of saying to their constituents, we can't work this out, so we're going to close the government next week. We can't work this out, so we're not going to plow your snow next week or pick up your trash next week or educate your kids next week. Not one local official in our state. The presiding officer knows this. He was a mayor. You would never have gone to your constituents and said, oh, by the way, we're closing next week because we have a disagreement. It makes no sense. Nowhere on the planet would that make any sense. To say nothing of the fact that we find ourselves at a moment in the country's history when we are engaged in wars all across the globe, when we're now involved in a multilateral effort in Libya, when we've got thousands of people that are government employees trying to help the Japanese weather this unbelievable tragedy that they're facing, when we have economic competitors all over the globe that are trying to seek an economic advantage against the United States in the 21st century, we're saying, well, we're going to take a time out because we can't agree. We're going to pause, take a rest, close the government. So the American people must think, well, you guys must be very far apart. And that's why I brought this slide. Now, I don't know the exact details here. I don't know the exact details here. Nobody does. The reports on the news tonight were that several $billion separated the negotiators. And I've heard it range from, 5 to 10 or somewhere in there. So I picked the number 7, which is more than several. But that appears to be what divides the parties. $7 billion, Mr. President. $7 billion. That is a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But look at it in the context of our deficit and our operating budget. So here is this line. You can't even see it. This line is the $7 billion right here. Okay? This is our deficit, and this is our operating budget. $1.5 trillion, $3.6 trillion. I apologize, Mr. President, but I couldn't fit it on one sign. I had to have two signs to be able to show what the order of magnitude difference is between what we're squabbling over here in Washington and what our deficit looks like and what our operating budget looks like. That's it. That's it. That's it. Do you know this difference? If this were the city of Alamosa, the former mayor is the presiding officer in my state, which has roughly a $14 million operating budget in the San Luis Valley, if they were saying we were going to shut down our government based on this difference, that would be like Alamosa saying we can't figure it out because $27,000 is what we're apart. Mr. President, if you and I went to Applebee's tonight and we had their $20 dinner for two, and then we had a fight over the bill, we would be fighting over 4 cents. That's what would separate us. Roughly 0.19% of our operating budget. I could even understand if the parties were saying we disagree, let's keep negotiating. But I can't for the life of me understand how on those terms anyone could threaten a government shutdown, especially when we confront the dangers that we confront today. And the answer is that it's not about our budget. The time that we've consumed here is taking time away from the conversations that you and I have been part of, that people on the other side of the aisle have been part of, that the Gang of Six, a bipartisan group of senators, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans led by Mark Warner and Saxby Chambliss, have been working on. That's what we should be doing. But we shouldn't be threatening to close the government. I don't think we should be threatening to close the government under any circumstances, but certainly not when the economics are as thin as that. And I know there are people, and it's not all Republicans, there's some people in the House that, just feel like the social issues that they've attached to this piece of budget legislation are somehow more important than keeping the government open, or that litigating those issues in the context of trying to keep the government open is the right thing to do. I disagree. I think they should have a hearing. I think that we ought to have a floor discussion about what we want to do with women's reproductive health or the other issues that are there. I'm glad to have that debate. But don't threaten to shut the government down based on that. And so I will say again, as I said the other night, that I encourage the leaders of both parties in both chambers, our president, to find a way to settle this, to find a way to work it out, to find a way to keep this government open at this moment when we've got troops deployed all over the globe. To live up to the standard of every single local elected official in my state, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, who are making tough choices in this budget situation, but managing to respond to their constituents' priorities. This week in Colorado, they reached a budget agreement. The governor's a Democrat. The Senate is a majority Democratic. The House is Republican. The Speaker of the House, who is a Republican, said, this is the first budget I've been able to vote for in years because of the leadership of John Hickenlooper, our governor, and the leadership of the Democratic and Republican Party there. That breeds confidence in people's work. And I think that if we can find a way to work together here across the party lines in a bipartisan way and demonstrate that we can keep the government open, and much more important even than that we can create a path toward fiscal sanity in this country, I think the American people would cheer. Right now, we haven't given them very much to cheer about, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I see the senator from Texas is here, and I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I think we've been talking for a long time today about this fiscal crisis, because I don't think anyone is looking at the looming deadline that's going to occur tomorrow night as something that we want to happen and government to shut down. I hope so much that the President and Speaker Boehner and the Democratic leader of the Senate, Senator Reid, can come to terms, because we are so close to having an agreement on a continuing resolution until the end of this fiscal year, which is what we need. No one would run a business the way this government is being run, in 2-week continuing resolutions and 1 week and 3 weeks. It is not the way to run anything. It's not organized, and you can't plan. And most certainly we know that taxpayer dollars are not being the most efficiently spent if we are going in 1 and 2 week increments. But the stakes are very high. I look back at the year 2000, before 9/11, we had balanced budgets. We had a balanced budget in the year 2000. We had a balanced budget up until 9/11. That was only 10 years ago, and we ought to be able, as the United States Congress working with the President, to say, if we had a balanced budget 10 years ago, we can't possibly be so far over the line that we can't bring it back into balance. But to bring it back into balance, Mr. President, we're going to have to look long-term. We can't do it on $30 billion of difference in now to the end of the fiscal year spending. The fiscal year ends October 1, so we can't do it. We have to have a 10-year plan. We have to have clear cuts in spending, and we have to start working toward a balanced budget in a responsible way. Now, I can't say I agree with everything in it, but one of the House Budget Committee chairman, one of the Republicans in the House, has proposed a budget that would do exactly that. It would get us to a balanced budget. And now we need to start talking about the plans that he has put forward. The President hasn't, but Congressman Ryan has. We're going to change some of it, I hope, but we should have the same goal, and that is to get to a balanced budget over a period of time, 5 to 10 years. But we certainly are not going to do it in the next 24 hours talking about $30 billion or $36 billion going for the next 6 months. So I hope that we will settle this issue so we can go to the long-term issues. The long-term issue is going to happen in about a month and a half, when we're going to be called on to raise the debt ceiling. The debt's $14 trillion. We're looking at a deficit this year alone, of $1.5 trillion. If we go with the budget that the President submitted, $1.5 trillion more over $14 trillion, no wonder the people of this country are up in arms. And we need to listen to the people of this country who say, stop doing business in Washington the way it's always been done. Stop it now and start cutting back on the appetite for spending so that we will be able to have the balanced budget that we can see in our future. Mr. President, what we're looking at now is the potential of a government shutdown. I hope that it does not come to that. But there is one thing that we ought to be able to do in this Congress, and that is at least protect our military who are serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, and their families who are back home, worried enough about them because of where they are, and most certainly should not have another burden put on them of not knowing if their paycheck is going to come at the normal time of the month, the 1st and the 15th. So I have introduced Senate Bill 724. I want to ask unanimous consent to add Senator Sessions as a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
And I will say that that makes our 46th co-sponsor of Senate Bill 724. That is a very simple bill. It just says that if there's a government shutdown, the military will be paid. And the Secretary of Defense will have the discretion to also pay the civilians and those who are serving our military so that the food service in Afghanistan and Iraq will not be stopped because we have a government shutdown and the paychecks aren't going to come. I want to alleviate any fear on the part of any member of our military overseas that whose family is watching the debate in the House and on the Senate floor and watching this play out and thinking, am I going to be able to pay the mortgage on time? I want to alleviate that fear right now. I hope that we will be able to pass this bill that is gaining sponsors about every 15 minutes as people start looking at the looming shutdown of government that will happen about a little later than this tomorrow night if we don't have an agreement. I think all of us should put our military in the front line and say, they're going to show up for work. Let's assure them that their pay will not be delayed. That is not the message they're getting right now, but I think we can assure that they will get it. And, Mr. President, I have a letter that we just received from the National Association of Uniformed Services, which says, on behalf of more than 180,000 members and supporters of the National Association for Uniformed Services, I offer our full support for your legislation, Senate Bill 724, the Ensuring Pay for Our Military Act of 2011. And I ask unanimous consent to put this letter in the record.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, I hope that we come to agreement and do not shut the government down. We are so close to getting this temporary fiscal year, which we are already halfway through, finished, and let's take this off the books, because what we ought to be doing right now is focusing on the 2012 budget that starts October 1st, where we're having our hearings and we're asking our questions and we're trying to set our priorities with a lower scale of government, and we are going to cut back way below what we spent last year and the year before, but we're going to prioritize our spending. We had the FBI Director, Mueller, testify before our Commerce Justice Committee, our Subcommittee of Appropriations, to talk about the law enforcement needs of our FBI. I want to spend my time talking about the needs of the FBI and the other functions of government that we must do, and certainly our Armed Services Bill. And I don't want to be talking about shutting down government in the middle of the fiscal year because we are not coming together on $6 billion or $3 billion. I don't know exactly where they are now, but it's not very much in the scheme of things. What we need to do is get this behind us, alleviate the fears of our military personnel, alleviate the fears of their families that they might have a hiatus in their paychecks, and we need to start the big picture thinking. And the big picture, Mr. President, What we must focus on is cutting spending so that we can go toward a balanced budget and agree on a 5 to 10-year trajectory that will put us back in a fiscally responsible position for our country to have the credibility in the world that we should have, for our children to be debt-free for what we have used in government in this country. We don't need to pass that debt to our children if we are responsible stewards of both their lives and our taxpayer dollars. And, Mr. President, we need to be the leaders that people expect us to be. The people spoke in very loud terms last November that they do not want more spending, and I hear it everywhere I go. I hear it in the airports, on the streets, when I'm talking to people in informal meetings, at the grocery store. People are scared to death of a $14 trillion debt. It has never been so high in our country before. I don't want that to be the legacy of this Congress and our generation. That is not the legacy that we should have as leaders of the greatest country in the free world. So I implore the leaders of Congress and the President to get the continuing resolution behind us so that we can focus on the big picture, and that is the $14 trillion debt that we are facing right now, and doing the responsible cutting that will begin to cut back on the deficits and take down the debt and address the issues that have not been addressed for all these years once and for all. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to commend the senator from Texas for her bill, which I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor of, to make sure that our men and women in harm's way continue to receive their compensation and support for their families if, in fact, there is a government shutdown, which certainly I'm going to continue to do everything I can to help from happening. And I'm not going to give up, and I know others aren't as well. But I want to commend the senator because I think this is very important, and we need to send that message, and we need to get this done. We need to get the bill done.
Mr. President, I just want to say to the senator from Michigan that she was one of the first to sign on as a co-sponsor of this bill, and I think that is the right thing to do, and I appreciate her leadership. And I just got a note from my staff and would like to ask unanimous consent to also add Senator Scott Brown and Senator Amy Klobuchar as co-sponsors of Senate Bill 724. Thank you to the senator from Michigan, and I would like to add them as co-sponsors.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we can do this together if we will come together and focus on those great young men and women in Afghanistan and Iraq serving right now and do something that is right for them regardless of whether we have to face a government shutdown for all the rest of us.
Mr. President, I couldn't agree more that we need to do this, and I think it's important that the Senate take the lead as we did on another piece of legislation that our friend from California brought forward and was passed unanimously by the Senate to set down another very important principle, and that is that if we, those making the decisions, cannot come together, then it should be the members of Congress not getting a paycheck. Our troops should be getting paid, but the members of Congress should see their paychecks stop. Unfortunately, under law right now, members of Congress would be the only ones whose paychecks didn't stop. And that's something that we have passed in the Senate to change that. Frankly, Mr. President, I found that to be pretty embarrassing. And then it became outrageous when we found out that, in fact, the troops' paychecks might stop. And so it's important that we send two messages. The people responsible for making this decision ought to take responsibility, and paychecks stop if it doesn't get done. But we've got to make sure our men and women in harm's way continue to have our not only support verbally, but that we show it in our priorities here. Mr. President, I hope we're not going to see this happen. There is no reason for this to happen. We're talking about a shutdown that would not only affect many people around this country, families, small businesses, but affect also the markets, our international standing. I mean, this is a very serious issue, and people of goodwill can solve this. I mean, we all know that we've got to be smart, we've got to change the way Washington operates and cut the things that aren't working and invest in the things that do. There's no question about that. We've got to do that, and in fact, we have agreed to major changes in that direction. But it's a challenge, and I just want to take a second because I think the toughest job in town today is from the Speaker, and it's very clear that he has a very difficult job when there are people giving a standing ovation for him when he's talking about preparing for a shutdown. We don't need this. That's not what we need. What we need is to continue to have people of goodwill coming together, like we've just been talking about, and supporting our troops, and saying, we can complete this year's budget. We're half the way through the year. Let's just get it done. Because what happens if it doesn't get done? It's not about us. It's not about us. We'll be all right. It's not about us. It is about the people that are affected. We know, and let's just go through what happened back in 1995. In 1995, there were 400,000 veterans who saw their disability benefits and pension claims delayed. Our veterans, again, we're talking about our troops, but in the last shutdown, 400,000 veterans had delays in their disability benefits and pensions. That's really, that ought to be a motivator for all of us, Mr. President, to get this done. And it would be outrageous if that were to happen again. There were approximately $3 billion in U.S. exports that were delayed because they couldn't get through the export licenses and so on. And that's jobs for us. As we look at a time when we want to export our products, not our jobs, around the world, delaying that affects our jobs. We know that hundreds of thousands of Medicare and Social Security requests were delayed the last time this happened. And for the first time in history, 6 states ran out of federal unemployment insurance at the time. And small business loans, we know, could be stopped or delayed, as well as tax refunds from people who've been waiting, hard-earned dollars, stretching every penny to make ends meet, who are waiting for those refunds. So it makes no sense. It makes no sense for the economy. It makes no sense for families, for seniors, for veterans. We need to come together and get this done. We also need to make sure that whatever is done, and what we've been fighting for, the majority here has been fighting for, is to make sure whatever is done does not one more time ask middle-class families and small businesses to be the ones that have to sacrifice. In my state, our families, middle-class families, people trying desperately to stay in the middle class or to get in the middle class, have been the ones hurt over and over and over again. Their job, losing their job or losing their income, their house underwater, trying to make ends meet, not sure right now if they're going to be able to have the kids continue to go to college, all of the things. Gas prices going up like crazy. Are you going to be able to even just get back and forth to work? Those are not the folks that should be one more time sacrificing, carrying the load. Same people sending their children, grandchildren to war. Our middle-class families should not be the ones continuing to be the only ones sacrificing in order to deal with what is a national debt and the need to balance the budget and change the way we fund Washington, reduce spending, change the priorities. What I'm concerned about is that middle-class families and small businesses not continue to be the ones to get the brunt over and over and over again. You know, I think about the struggles, Mr. President, the last couple of years in Michigan and what we've had to go through with our automobile industry and how proud I am of where we are now but the sacrifice that it took to get there. You know, we're making the best automobiles, we're winning all the awards. Our people are smart and skilled, and we've got the best engineers and the best skilled workforce. But a couple of years ago, we had a horrible crisis. And it took sacrifice from everybody to turn that around, and some smart thinking. Workers had to sacrifice, beginning pay cut in half. Retirees, the company, shareholders, communities, everybody had to sacrifice in order to turn this around. But we did something else. We then said, while you're cutting back, we're going to invest in the future. We're going to invest in innovation. We're going to invest in those things that are going to allow us to grow and create more jobs and be successful. And after 2 years of a tremendous amount of hard work and everybody sacrificing with some smart decisions and investments, we're turning it around, making a profit for the first time, each of our companies since 1999. We're turning things around because people were willing to be in it together. And that's really what I'm fighting for, is the kind of decisions, because we know we have to change the way we do business and we have to cut the things that don't work to invest in the things that do, but everybody's got to be in on this, everybody. Not just some people who are being asked to give over and over and over and over again. Not just small businesses who didn't cause what happened on Wall Street but can't get the loan because of what happened with the crisis, holding on, trying to make it, trying to get the capital they need to keep the doors open or to expand. They didn't cause this, and yet we seem to find the same people over and over again having to make the sacrifices. That doesn't make sense. I don't think it's American. And so what we're seeing now as we close in on the final decisions of people coming together is a question of whether we're going to have everybody be a part of the solution or one more time ask the middle class and small businesses. We can come together and get this done if people want to do that. There is no question about it. That people of goodwill can get it done, and I think that it's in everybody's best interest to do that on every single level. But there's no question as well that we have very different priorities that are being debated today in our country. And we saw that this last week in very stark terms, which goes to the whole question of, again, how do we solve our problems and is everybody in? Every American going to be part of turning the ship around? And that goes to the budget proposal this week that has added, in my opinion, insult to injury, which relates to the proposal coming from the House Budget Chair to change Medicare as we know it. To change Medicare from an insurance plan for our retirees and people with disabilities to something that would be a voucher for insurance companies. It's stunning to me, actually, in looking at this proposal, and extremely, extremely concerning to me about the ramifications of what is being proposed. And then what adds insult to injury is that the proposal is being made to unravel Medicare, do away with Medicare as we know it, raise the cost, the premiums, the medical costs for almost every senior in the country, according to the Congressional Budget Office. But at the same time, this same budget document would give over $1.8 trillion in new tax cuts for special interests and the millionaires of this country. Not the folks that have been working hard to try to make it, who haven't gotten the big breaks, but one more round of big breaks for the people who have not felt this recession. The people who've gotten the special breaks, who've somehow not had to go through their house underwater, their income go down, worried about the kids, worried about the car, worried about the gas. The folks who earn over $1 million or the special tax breaks for those interests that are doing extremely well in this country. That's not how I view shared sacrifice in order to be able to solve the country's problems and get us out of debt and grow the economy. Cutting Medicare for seniors, dismantling it, and at the same time giving one more round of tax breaks for millionaires and the major special interests of the country. That's wrong, in my judgment. It's the wrong set of priorities, and it's worth debating, and we will debate that. You know, it's interesting. I remember, Mr. President, when we were passing health care reform, and we were focused on the fact that we had to make sure Medicare was healthy for the future and make some tough decisions so that it would be strong and there for seniors. And we took a look at overpayments for-profit insurance companies, and there are major overpayments. And we decided to cut those back. It was actually causing the majority of beneficiaries, the majority of seniors, to see their premiums go up because of some payments to a few that were overpayments. And we decided that we would cut back on those insurance company overpayments, and we would instead focus on quality in Medicare and making sure seniors could go to the doctor and get their cancer screenings or wellness visits without out-of-pocket costs, and bring down the cost of medicine, and that we would focus on ways to streamline, focus on quality, and streamline in a way that would cut costs. And we were able to save, according to the budget gurus, we were able to save over, I believe it's 10 years, $500 billion. It didn't cut any benefits for seniors. But the other side of the aisle said that this was terrible. It was terrible because we were focused on cutting overpayments to insurance companies. And now we see the proposal that would dismantle Medicare, and it would cut what is the average amount a senior spends on medical care in a year, which is about $15,000 a year, and it would instead cut that amount down to $6,000 a year and give it in a voucher to an insurance company. And that's okay. Well, that's a different set of priorities than I have, Mr. President, and I know that you have. And so these are debates we are going to have, and they're important debates for our country. How do we go forward? How do we solve the budget deficit? How do we grow the economy? How do we create jobs? And how do we make sure that what we are doing is fair for everybody and keeps what works while cutting what doesn't? Medicare is a great American success story. Do we need to make sure that it's there for the next generation? Absolutely. Do we need to look at ways to streamline and cut costs? We've done that, and we need to continue to do that. Absolutely, we need to do that. But it's a great American success story that has allowed a whole generation of older Americans to live healthy lives, play with their grandkids. And now that I have two beautiful grandchildren, who, by the way, are the most beautiful grandchildren in the world, Mr. President, just for the record. But now as I have my 3-year-old and 1-year-old, and I look at the fact that, you know, I want to be healthy for a long time so I can be there for them. And what a wonderful gift as Americans we have given to seniors, that gift of Medicare and Social Security, and so that they can be healthy and live in dignified ways in their own homes and be able to live long lives for their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. That's something we should be proud of. So as we go through this debate, we have two kinds of debates. We've got to deal with what's happening immediately, complete this 6 month, not 6 year, 6 month. We're just talking about 6-month budget, in a common-sense way, make sure that troops get paid, make sure that we don't have any veterans losing their opportunities for disability benefits or pension benefits, and small businesses not being delayed from getting their loans, and those kinds of things right now, immediately. And in my judgment, we need to put down a marker saying, if we can't come together, that we're the ones that don't get paid, not the troops. And then the next step is to debate the vision of this country and where we go. What is important and what's not? And should some Americans be asked to sacrifice in order to solve our problems and be stronger to compete in a global economy? Or should everybody be asked to do their part? I think that people want to do their part and they're willing to do their part, but we need to make that clear, that we expect everybody to be a part of the solution. In closing, Mr. President, I would just say what I find most concerning today when we're in a global economy, and we ought to be talking about the United States competing against China, the United States against competing with Germany or India or Korea. We're not doing that. We're standing here on the floor of the Senate on a Thursday night talking about whether or not people will come together to complete a 6-month budget and make sure our troops can get paid. That's not the debate we should be having. We have precious time available to us, and the debate we should be having is about how, as Americans, we're going to compete in a global economy and win. That's what we need to be doing, and that's the debate that I'm anxious to have. And I hope we're not going to give up. I'm not going to give up on what we need to do right now to be able to come together, get this done, avoid a government shutdown, and get on to the real business of creating jobs and competing in a global economy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about the disastrous consequences if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle continue to prioritize politics and posturing over what's best for Americans and our fragile economic recovery. We have 27 hours to convince them that shutting down the government shouldn't be treated as a gimmick. Shutting down the government is a serious matter with serious consequences for almost every American. Before I go into the consequences, the impacts this will have for my constituents, I want to just take a moment to reflect on how we got here. How are we now in a position where a government shutdown is 27 hours away? Well, one thing is certain. There is a lot of misinformation and confusion out there. A number of my friends on the other side of the aisle have been saying that the Democrats and the President refused or failed to pass appropriations for fiscal year 2011. This is revisionist and confused history. One of my colleagues, a new member, said today, and I quote, "Why was it that a few months ago after the election, but before the new Congress took over, when the President had both houses of Congress under control of his party, why did he opt not to pass a full budget for fiscal year 2011, unquote. Now, the presiding officer knows this is just not true. Okay? This isn't true. And I've been hearing a lot of this. We had appropriations legislation for the entire federal government ready to go. Democrats were in support of it. We were prepared to fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year. But remember, it takes 60 votes to pass something like that in the Senate. There were 58 Democrats in the Senate last December. There were 42 Republicans, so we needed some Republicans to pass a full budget for 2011. Not many, but we needed two. We didn't get any. Not a single Republican agreed to support the bill. That's what happened. Now, for a while, we were told that a number of Republicans were going to support it. The bill had been negotiated on a bipartisan basis, but then, by all accounts, their arms were twisted and they were turned against the bill. The majority leader said, and I quote, "I am actively working to defeat it." And he did. He killed it. That's the truth. And my friends on the other side of the aisle celebrated. After they made clear that there would be not enough votes to pass the omnibus bill, my friend from Illinois engaged in a colloquy with Senator McCain asking, for those who don't understand what just happened, did we just win? And Senator McCain responded, I think there is very little doubt. And Senator Kirk concluded the colloquy by saying, I congratulate the senator. You know, we really do owe it in these serious times to engage in debate where we're really being honest with the American people. So there's little doubt about who opted not to pass a full budget for 2011. It wasn't the president, it wasn't the Democrats in the majority, it was my friends on the other side. My friends on the other side protest that they do not want to shut down the government, and then they point the finger at us. Yesterday, there was a rally for the Tea Party on Capitol Hill. Part of my delegation, Michelle Bachmann, who I like very much, said to the crowd there, the Democrats are trying to make it look like we want to shut the government down. We don't, but they're trying to do that. Silence. But the same day, the same rally, Mike Pence, said to them, it looks like we're going to have to shut down the government. And what did the Tea Party crowd do? They started chanting, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. According to his own account, when Speaker Boehner told his Republican colleagues that he had taken his caucus, he told them he had taken steps to prepare for a shutdown, he said, I got a standing ovation. There have been no standing ovations on our side about a prospective shutdown. Come on. We're trying to keep the government working. We desperately want to keep the government working. And the Republicans are busy fighting ideological battles. For them, this is not about the deficit. It's not about the budget. It's certainly not about jobs. This is about ideology. I was on the floor today. I was presiding today, and I had the opportunity to hear some of my colleagues talking about the bill the House passed today to fund the troops. We want to fund the troops if there's a shutdown. We do. And there's all this sanctimonious talk about how Republicans want the troops to be, the House had passed this bill to fund them. You know what was left out? That Steny Hoyer, the minority whip in the House, the Democratic minority whip, had offered up a bill to pay the troops if there was a shutdown. Clean bill, nothing attached to it other than that. It was voted down by the Republicans in the House. What passed? A bill with a rider on it about abortion. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that in all the sanctimonious talk. Let's at least have an honest debate, really. Adding abortion. Look, I know there are people that have very strong, heartfelt feeling, obviously, on abortion on both sides. This is something we've been talking about for decades. Why put it on Why put a rider on abortion? Pay for our troops. And then go in front of this body and say Democrats don't want to pay our troops. This can't be about holding a gun to our head and saying you have to come down on this side of this issue that people feel so strongly about and have been debating for 40 years. The Constitution, it was written, the Republicans in the House talk about the Constitution. They started by reading the Constitution. They started this session that way. They left out some of the embarrassing parts, the 3/5 of a slave is a 3/5 of a person. They left that out. But there's two houses, and there's a president. And so, but they don't want to compromise. They just want to put a gun to our head. They want to put, it's in the form of abortion, in the form of global warming. Look, 99.6% of climate scientists in the world believe there is global warming and it is caused by human beings. The other 0.4% work for coal companies or oil companies or a heritage foundation. And then there might be another guy somewhere. Why put a rider on this that's about ideology? This should not be an ideological debate. This is about getting our deficit together. This is about our economy. Look, we had 216,000 new jobs last month. We're beginning. This is fragile. It's fragile, but we're beginning to come out of this. This is not the time to shut the government down. And what it's going to do to people in my state, the seniors. Every day there are every week there's hundreds of seniors. How many a day? 270 a day applying for Social Security. They're not going to be able to do that, who just turned 65. There are people who are going to try to get FHA loans and won't be able to. There are farmers who want to put seed in the ground who are not going to have the farm service open. This is not the time to do this. There's going to be 800,000 federal employees laid off. What's that going to do to our economy? This isn't, look, there are things in this that I don't like. And I'm willing to swallow and do it. They want to cut hundreds of millions of dollars in hunger programs. 700 million plus to cut food for women, infants, and children. And it's been analyzed, and because of that, the neediest kids will not get their allotted amount of fruits and vegetables that's recommended. And not just during, and that's during the closing. That's what they want to do for the rest of the year, and presumably beyond that. And at the same time, we were here last December, and they wanted to extend the Bush tax cuts. They insisted on it, not just to your first $1 million, but to your second $1 million, to your 10th $1 million, to your 30th $1 million, to your 300th $1 million. The top 400 income earners in this country average over $330 million a year in income. They would rather those kids, those women, infant, and children, not get food, the food they need, be healthy. I don't like that. Boy, do I not like that. Boy, do I not like that. But I was willing to swallow that. But whatever is in this compromise, to keep the government going so we can go for the year, so we can get this economy going, so we can continue the job growth that we've had. Look, they know how to keep the government going. Take the ideological stuff off. Let's not resolve abortion in 27 hours. We've had more than 27 years, 37 years since Roe v. Wade. Let's not put a gun to everyone's head and say we have to resolve Roe v. Wade in 27 hours. Plain inappropriate. Well, I think you know how I feel. I think we know which side gives standing ovations when it's announced the government may very well be shut down. I think we know which side's crowd cheers and chants when they hear there may be a shutdown. I wish it weren't that way. I wish we were working together. I hope we're working together. I hope we're working together on Monday. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor, and I guess what I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senators have been coming to the floor today to talk about federal spending and the possibility of the federal government shutting down because there's no spending bill in place. Earlier, the House approved a one-week extension of federal spending to keep the government running past midnight tomorrow night. That's when the current temporary spending bill expires. The House vote was 247 to 181. That measure includes a proposed $12 billion in cuts and 6 months of funding for the Defense Department. That bill now comes here to the Senate, where Senate Majority Leader Reid has said it's a, quote, non-starter. And President Obama has threatened to veto the bill if it reaches his desk. We're hearing tonight that the President, Senator Reid, and Speaker John Boehner have not started their meeting tonight about federal spending. We'll have coverage of what, if anything, that comes out of that meeting. In the meantime, here are Senate Republicans and Democrats from earlier today talking about 2011 federal spending.
Speak as in morning business for 15